Hi, welcome everyone to the Inside Story podcast, where we take you behind the scenes of building successful businesses and becoming an entrepreneur. I'm your host, Dursun Halimova, a business coach and facilitator on a mission to help build impactful businesses. Today, my guest is Leo Benkel, who who is the founder of Pure Lambda, a consultancy company based in Luxembourg. Through his agency, he helps startups achieve engineering excellence and drive sustainable growth. Leo, for 10 years, lived and worked in Silicon Valley, helping startups build cutting edge technology. Now he brings the skills and expertise, hopefully to help us here in Europe, also to build successful startups and maybe increase the number of startup unicorns here, hopefully.
So
Leo,
hopefully,
Leo is also an angel investor who is passionate about supporting companies that build a better future. Leo, it's great to have you on the Inside Story podcast.
very happy
Welcome.
to be here. Yeah, thank you very much for having me here.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. As a tradition of this podcast, I will start off by reading few unfinished sentences, and I would ask you to finish them for us, please. Being an entrepreneur means
Being bold and courageous,
building an impactful business requires
perseverance, not giving up,
failure is
one step towards success.
Success is a result of
Everything you try to put together, that's all finally fits. So it's a puzzle.
That's a great one. And the last one, being fulfilled in life means
Achieving your goals and doing what you love.
Couldn't agree more with that part. I think it's so important to do things that you love, right? Life is too short to be busy
Exactly.
doing. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Leo, for this. And let's dive right in. If you don't mind, tell us briefly about who you are and what do you do exactly through Pure Lambda?
Sure. So I can give you a little short intro. So I've always been in tech. I've been writing code since I was very young. And I always knew I wanted to work in Silicon Valley. So I first started with a master in computer science, specialized in research and development and AI. And then I got the chance to work in San Francisco. So I stayed for 10 years there. And I worked for various companies, from startup to big corporation to big startup. I went through acquisition. And I was always kind of engineers close to the CTO, close to the CEO, going to lunch with the CTO, always having lunch with the salespeople. I was not one of the engineers that have a sandwich behind the laptop. So I always wanted to learn more from the big guys. And when COVID hit, I decided it was time to move back to Europe. So I moved to Luxembourg at the end of 2020, where I founded my first company called Pure Lambda. So with this company, I helped increase the velocity of software engineering team and reduce friction by leveraging my Silicon Valley experience and what I've learned that works, that doesn't work, and mixed with my personal European culture. I'm like the bridge between Silicon Valley and Europe. And most recently, I'm creating a second company called The Artificial Business that is focused on AI, and maybe we can talk more about it later.
Yes, that would be great. Yes. And thank you so much for a brief kind of overview of your professional career. Maybe we can speak to the part about how did you end up in Silicon Valley? How did you land your internship in the startup in the Silicon Valley and manage to work there for 10 years, especially given that it's very easy, as you've also pointed out in our earlier conversation, in Silicon Valley, hiring and firing is a very quick decision, right? So you have to really stand out and add value. Otherwise, it's very tough to land a job and then actually keep it.
Yeah. So I was very, very lucky because someone that I knew someone there. So that was like the first contact. And that already taught me how important the network is. Yeah, it was pure luck, but it taught me a very important lesson, which was, the network is everything. But so I reached out to them and they were like, well, we don't take interns. Like, we're not a charity. We're startups that we want to change the world. It's American way. Like, we do it or we don't. And we don't want interns. So like, please. They're like, well, okay, you can come for a month, but if you don't perform, you're out. And for me, I need 4 months of internship at this time. And if I don't perform and I stop my internship, I have to redo my entire year of school. So it was a tough decision, but I was like, I can do it. I've been writing code all my life. I'm sure I can do it. And I think it was like after 2 weeks, I found a way to improve one of the algorithms, and they were like, okay, you can stay. And then I came back for another internship, and then they did my working visa, and then I stayed for 10 years.
Yeah. So this was roughly what time when you
You
first
mean like how
went?
long?
When you got your first internship, this was what
The first
in
internship was 4 months.
and this was like 2010 something time frame
To
or
2020, I think, like right, like before the end of no 2010, yeah, like before the
2010.
end of my master, I think, yeah.
Uh-huh. So you did your internship, you went back to France, I think you were studying
Yeah,
in
back to
France,
school.
right?
Yeah.
Back to school, you finished, and then you went back to Silicon
Well,
Valley.
to finish in the school I was at, you need to finish by 6 months of internship. So I did my 6 months of internship back at the same company. So I was basically 4 months there, back in France for just 6 months, then back in
Uh,
the US for 6 months, then back in France just 1 month to change my visa from internship to work, pick up
mhm.
my, my my engineering degree, and then I was gone for 10 years.
Yeah, wow, amazing. And you kind of touched upon already that, having lived, not only lived, but also worked in so many different startups in different sizes, right? Experiencing also the acquisition process. I'm curious, can you speak to that to that experience and then compare it to Europe now that you have been living and working here for a few years? In your opinion, what do you think are the major differences between, let's say, when you compare European and American startups and overall the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest difference that we see in the news, and everybody can see it, is the difference in raising funds, right? Like the amounts are like 1,000 times difference. Like when a company in Europe raises a few hundred grand, it's a few 100 million in the US. And I think it all comes from maybe the health is a bit too strong word, but like from the dynamic of the ecosystem. Because in the US, you have stock options, which make the employees very profitable when an exit happens. And then when an exit happens, you have all those employees as well as the founders that are all potential new investors for the next generation. And so as that's been happening for so many years in California that now, it's keep bubbling. It's like this snowball. But in Europe, it's really hard to do stock options, and the people are a lot more risk averse. And as well in Europe, like when you exit, a lot of people will just be like, well, I'm retired now, or I'll just do a little bit of things. But there's not this like kind of like circles as profound as it is in California. In San Francisco, you really have this like give back to the community, so it feels almost like an obligation. Like if you have the way to provide to the community, you kind of
Mhm.
have to do it. But also in Europe, it's a very different mindset, and there was a big differences in the employment. Like we talked about earlier, if you get hired, you can be fired the next day. Like it's a trial period that doesn't end. So it's good for startups because, if you hire an engineer, it's not a good person, then, you can just fire this person, take a new one and try again. Whereas in Europe, if you hire the wrong person and it's a permanent contract, your startup is dead. So there's pros and cons, and of course it depends on who you're placing yourself into. Like as an employee, it's amazing to have the security of your job and all the securities that Europe provides. But as a startup, it's a bit more challenging to navigate all those regulation and rules. So it creates some friction, but at the end, it might be better to all have this kind of like work-life balance. And that's one of the reasons why I moved back to Europe, to not be overworked anymore, even though, I overwork myself now.
Yeah, I guess 10 years was enough for you to overwork. But then, yeah, as you said, you're starting your second company. So I think overworking is kind of
Yeah, I guess I need.
unavoidable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe let me touch upon something that you've mentioned, and I was going to ask you about this. In the first part of your answer, you mentioned that in US the ticket sizes are much bigger versus in Europe, and also you kind of alluded to the ambition, right? And in our earlier discussion, you talked about exit strategies, so that many European companies don't have exit strategy in mind, or they have very modest goals when they want to exit, which is nothing wrong with having modest goals. Some people are perfectly happy having a small company and keeping the full ownership. But I think the major challenge here, as you pointed out, is lack of cash also, right? And in US, we have many entrepreneurs who successfully exited, and they have cash in their hands now that they can either spend on building their second or third company or reinvest back in the ecosystem to support others. Whereas in Europe, that's unfortunately not the case. And I think most of the funding comes from the public sector. The private sector also brings, but as you said, smaller ticket sizes. So in your opinion, what has to happen here in Europe so entrepreneurs have much bigger and bolder ambitions, have a kind of exit strategy in mind, so they reinvest this money back into the ecosystem?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I think this latest generation of startups in Europe is getting this mindset now. And I think it's also come from the quote unquote brainwash, Silicon Valley brainwash that has been happening for so many years, right? It's like everybody you're gonna meet in San Francisco at some point or another is gonna tell you, do you prefer a big slice of a small cake or a small slice of a gigantic cake, right? And that's always what they tell you when they're like, well, I'm gonna take 50% of your company, but now it's valued at like 2 billion. And people are always like, well, I don't want to lose my company, but and then they always tell you this quote. So I think it's a very different mindset. I think in Europe we go slowly but surely. Like during 2008, 2014, during the economic crisis, a lot of companies survived a lot more easily in the US than in Europe than in the US. So in Europe, it's a lot more careful in the action, but that also means that we are slower. And so when two companies doing the same kind of things compete from the US and here, it's a bit unfair advantage towards the US because they are willing to take more risk and die if necessary, whereas in Europe we go a lot more slowly. Having said that, to limit those risks, I wish there were more regulations towards making life easier for people that have failed. For instance, I remember when I created my first company, they asked me to sign a document saying that I've never bankrupt. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to open the company. So if you fail once, it's kind of over, which is sad in a way because maybe you have tons of ideas and maybe the one doesn't work, but then the second one might. So you always have to kind of be careful in your steps when you do it, which is as advantage and pros and cons, right? It's like everything. So we've seen economically, I think it's the US system works better, but then from a human level, I feel like the European way is also nice. We don't need to control the world. But of course, if we want to have a better startup ecosystem engine, we need the fuel, and the fuel is the cash, right? So at some point, something needs to happen. So I think maybe having easier way to make stock options or tax advantage for investors, to motivate and reduce this risk. Because I think thinking we can change the culture is very a dream, because the people don't you don't want to change people, because otherwise, why are we here? We're here to make something of our own in Europe. So I feel like embracing the European culture, but then seeing what are the blockers and building regulation around that. Like, for instance, okay, we take less risk, so let's make the risk less, by regulation. So maybe reducing the taxes or being able to reduce your have advantage if you lose, or those type of things will make it easier, or maybe reduce the burden of bankruptcy so you can recreate faster, all those things to make the risk less than it is and encourage this dynamic.
Exactly. I totally agree, because I think there is so many good things about European ecosystem. And I agree. I mean, having been a full-time employee and now an entrepreneur, I think I appreciated, the safety net the European labor market provides. And I think it's more, yes, as you said, human oriented, right? Where you can somewhat balance work and life. But at the same time, there are few, as you pointed out, in my opinion, these are easy fixes, right? Like this bank and proving you haven't went bankrupt. This inhibits so many entrepreneurs to pursue then their second and third
and I feel even the first time entrepreneurs might be scared, because they're like, oh shit, if I fail, then it will be on my record and then I won't be able to do anything else anymore. And so it feels like all those risks adds up, that some people that might have great ideas don't want to take the risk because it's too dangerous.
Indeed, yes. And also with the stock options, in my mind, it is something that could be also relatively easily implemented. I spoke to one entrepreneur, female entrepreneur. She's from UK. She was hoping to start her startup here in Luxembourg, but for this major reason, she decided not to, because she's like, how am I supposed to compete with big companies who have a lot of benefits, right? How can I compete in the job market to attract great talent if I'm not providing as much financial benefits as they are? And stock option is, I think, a great way to lure in talented people, because
And
they
also,
also want the piece of the cake.
yeah, and I think it's also like beyond just, the cash, it's also create this kind of like loyalty, because when you work your ass off, especially as a startup, when you're an employee and you have to work 40 hours a week just to make the product, like in the first few years, you feel like you built the startups and then you have nothing to show for beside your salary. And so I feel like you are more motivated when you're working for yourself, like you building your value shares of your portfolio while you work as an employee, which is very more motivating than just giving it all to the founder.
Indeed, yeah, it gives kind of sense of ownership, like I
Yeah, and
own a piece.
exactly. And then we all in the same team, right? Like with all your colleagues and your managers and everybody, when you do great, everybody get paid more, right?
Indeed, yeah. Well, hopefully one of the policymakers or
Yeah, yeah.
bankers are listening to our conversation, and they will take these suggestions on, hopefully, because I think these are the easy ways that could be fixed to be able to have a bit more easier access for startups, right? And so I think this is going to encourage a lot more people to hopefully take risks, because at the end of the day, if you are unable to take risks, entrepreneurship has, I guess, no point.
Right.
I also wanted to touch upon one of the things that you mentioned when we were talking about how, or what the European startups are failing to get right, or what they are unable to get right, to nail it, compared to US startups, for example. And one thing you mentioned was related to outsourcing the tech development. Can you speak to that and elaborate? What do you mean?
Yeah, so I think there's a big difference into the structure of the startups in the US and Europe. And that's not true to the latest startup I've seen. Like now people starting to embrace more this way of doing things, but a lot of companies today don't own the products they're selling. Like they developed it outsourced it, and then there is a company abroad that know about the product. And then the entire team here in Europe, you just salespeople. And it's a bit sad because then you're not as flexible as if you own the entire development process. It's kind of like if you were, I don't know, like Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola don't make Coca-Cola, it doesn't make sense, right? It's like at some point you're selling your product. So what company are you if you're not making your product? So I would recommend, and I know it's not easy because of the salaries and everything, but a lot of time you see there is more money spent into selling than into building. And if you look at a lot of successful American companies, they are putting pretty much 90% of their money into the development because they want the best product possible so that they don't need to sell it. Then it sells itself. So it's like a product-led growth. And if you look at companies like Calendly and Stripe, and they don't even need salespeople. The first thing you do when you create a company is you create an account with them and you set up the membership, and you never talk to their sales team. They don't use it. I don't even know if they have sales team. They don't need it because the product is so good. The user experience is great. So I wish we would put more effort into UX, UI, into design, into making great products. Because if you look on your phone right now, all the apps you have are not Europeans, and the European one you have, the user experience is usually not the best. But they have a lot of salespeople, they will talk to you until you sign. But once you sign, you're like, well, the user experience is not the best. And it's a big generalization, right? There are amazing companies as well in Europe, but I wish there were more of them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more I think US put so much emphasis on the servicing the customer, providing the best service, be it a product or service that you are providing, right? I've worked in US in the service sector for some time, and there, they always say customer is right? And
Yeah.
your job is to really make sure they're happy, especially with the products, right? As you said, the user experience. And I think this is the major differentiator between companies that are also able to even grow successfully bootstrapping, right? Because their focus is on building something that customers need and love, and they want to keep coming back. And when you
Like if you
build
look at
something,
the main number company should focus on for a very long time is user retention, not user growth. Like
mm,
if you have 10,000 users but they never renew their subscription, it's not as good as if you have 2 users that have been following you every year for the last 10 years, right? Because then that means when you acquire a new one, they will also stay forever. So because every time you acquire a new customer, it costs money, right? Through advertisement, sales, everything. So if you're burning more cash for the users and since they leave right away, what's the point? So the focus should always be on user retention. And then when your user retention is above, 70, 80%, sure, then you can start growing and explode. But I feel like in Europe, we hire a lot of salespeople before we get to the user retention that will keep those customers that we get.
you did mention that it's challenging, right? In Europe, for example, in Luxembourg, I keep hearing that even attracting and then keeping this talent, especially tech-oriented professionals, is very
Yeah, it's not
difficult.
easy.
And
Yeah.
the salary, right? When you're talking about outsourcing to a cheaper location versus hiring someone in-house, it's very difficult. Do
Yeah.
you know any companies in Europe, in Luxembourg, who you think have nailed this product-led growth and have really mastered, kind of developed a solid product that customers really want to buy?
One can come to mind will be virtual rangers. Like they have all their team in-house and they're growing. And when there is an experiment to do, when there's like some demand from a customer, they don't need to struggle to make a new contract with an outsourcing company. They can just be like, well, take a cycle to try this and see if it works. And so then they're growing, right? Because they have good team and they're all here. And by I mean they're all here, I mean they all like working for the company, because of course remote distributed companies work very well as well. Like I don't mean everybody needs to be in the office, and I'm very pro remote, but there's a difference between outsourcing and insourcing, even remote, right? You can have employees all around the globe, but they are your people. And even if it's freelance, but it's like, full-time freelance that you pay every month for the last 10 years, right? But if you hire a software factory, as they called, their business model is just to push code as quickly as possible. And often it's, if you find ones that charge you per the hour, their goal is just to crack as many hours as possible. So they won't care for the quality, and it's even better for them if the quality is not there, because then you come back for fixing bugs and everything. And then you are completely dependent from this company, because if you want any change, if you want any modification, you have to go to them.
I mean, I think what's important is at least to have your core team, right? The core team who basically makes your business, to have them on a full-time payroll, so they are kind of invested in the company. And then outsourcing other kind of services might be an option if you have to outsource. But I agree. I think at least having the core.
And you can have a hybrid team, like you can have your CTO and your software architects here, and then outsource, the easy task, like the development of small features, maybe the UI, maybe the bug tracking. All of this could be outsourced while the core team is here. And you see this often in the US as well, where you have like the core research team that builds the value in-house, but then all the around things are being outsourced.
Okay, staying on this topic of European versus American startups and how we can do things differently and better in Europe. What is your vision for startup ecosystem in Europe? How can we restart the engine in the good direction using your words?
I think, like we talked about earlier, I think stock options will be a great addition. And relaxing a bit on the requirement to create a company and relaxing a bit on the consequence of failing, because all of this will make the flow a little easier. Like the cycle should be, investment, growth, exit, back to investment, right? And you want to look at this cycle and see where are the friction points and just put some oil in the engine. Right? And so, I mean, I'm not a politician, so that's the job of the regulations and everything to kind of like see where things can be smoothed out. But as an actor in this ecosystem, I see the frictions, right? Just creating a bank account takes 6 months. So there are obviously issues, right?
Indeed, yeah. I mean, creating a bank account should be so easy, right? And then it's kind of like chicken and egg problem. If you
Yeah.
don't have a business bank account, you can't start a business. But then to create it, if it takes 6 months, yeah.
Yeah. It's really challenging to have all the components at the same time, and also like even just getting an appointment at the notary takes several months, and it takes so much money just to put the paper together. Whereas in California, it takes $20, and one day you have your company ready to go.
Well, let's say we have a lot of room for improvement here in Europe.
Yeah. But I think in Europe, I think we are like an old continent, right? It's an old industry. So we're targeting towards big corporations where people stay 40 years in the same company. And now, the world has switched to this more like smaller, flexible, agile entities. And I think the politics have not adapted yet. So I'm sure we're going to catch up at some point. We're not there yet, but, we hopefully will be able to advise in the right direction.
I hope so too. And maybe let's now switch slightly the topic, because you are, in addition to being a startup mentor, you also invest in startups. So far, you've invested in around 200 startups, either directly or through portfolio investment.
I like to invest in portfolios to diversify. So yes, I put like a little bit in a portfolio, but then because the portfolio is large, you end up with like crumbs of a lot of companies. So at the end, yes, you end up being involved with that many startups, but it's not like, $1 billion portfolio, obviously.
No, I mean, these little crumbs might turn into, something bigger. You never know.
And it's like the snowball effect, right? Then you get the return and then you reinvest it and you reinvest it. And I've been doing this since, I don't know, for the last more than 10 years now. So
amazing. Yeah. So you actually you refer to yourself risk-aware investor. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, as much as everyone else, and I'm a European as well, right? So I don't like taking risk like everyone else. But I feel like my risk taking is becoming better when I'm aware of the risk, right? So it's like informed risk taking. So for me, I like to work with the startups I'm going to invest in. I like to be able to do a due diligence. I like to be able to read the code. I like to be able to meet the founders. And so I'm aware of all the risks involved. And in those conditions, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'll take this risk because I'm aware of the risk I'm taking. But that's why I don't really like investing in the stock market and everything, because I don't have the skills or the know-how to know what the risk I'm getting into with those companies that all of a sudden, if Elon Musk tweets something, the entire stock market will blow up, right? So I prefer to do, real estate and startups where I can, it's more physical. I can meet the people, I can see the asset, I can see the company, and so it's like awareness of the risk so that you can take it meaningfully.
Yeah, kind of educated guess, as they say, kind of, as you said,
exactly.
informed risk taking. No, that's good. And I wanted also to touch upon, because as we're speaking here today, you're also building your second company that you briefly mentioned in the beginning of our conversation. Your second company aims to help companies build an in-house AI platforms that are much safer and cheaper compared to, for example, ChatGPT. And
Mhm.
plus, it counts towards companies' assets. Can you tell us
Yeah,
a little bit more about this initiative?
sure,
What
sure.
problem you are trying to solve?
So the company is called the Artificial Business. And so with my business partner and I, we're solving these big problems that companies are facing today. So if you look at statistics, 70% of employees today use ChatGPT without telling their employers. So you're like, shit, with GDPR and everything, that's horrible, right? And on the other side, you see that those employees have increased their productivity by 40%. So now you're like, shit, I can't turn it off because if I turn it off, I lose the productivity. But if I turn it on, my data is leaking everywhere. So what do I do? And so all the companies now are a bit scared about this because they see on their VPN, all the traffic going toward ChatGPT, and then they see the report on their table in 2 days instead of 2 weeks. So they're a bit like scared about it. So we were talking with my business partner and we were like, well, why can't we solve this? And so I looked online, find some open source solution, look at how to adapt them, build them together, and assemble this product that you can install on-prem. And the idea of installing it on-prem is that now you can upload your customer data and it stays in your company. You can turn off the internet and it stays in your company. If ChatGPT have a day when it doesn't work, your company is not impacted. If ChatGPT decides to increase their price, you're not impacted. And because it runs in-house and because of the way we structure our business model, we don't know how many users or how many tokens or how many requests you do. So the billing doesn't depend on the usage. We want you to use it as much as you want because we want to enable AI in companies. So that's like the foundation we were thinking of. Then my master and what I've built in San Francisco for the last 10 years was multi-agent systems. So that's the idea of those AI systems that can interact with each other. So sure, the human will ask some questions, but then the solution will be assembled by multiple agents. So the advantage of this approach is that each agent is a lot smaller than a gigantic model. So the hardware required to execute them is a lot smaller and a lot cheaper. The second advantage is that they are heavily specialized. So if you want to change the way one work, the other one won't be impacted, right? You can just replace your financial agent by another one because something has changed, something happened, or you want to improve the performance. You can without impacting the rest of your work. If you were to have just one gigantic model, like most companies is building today, you can't change one thing without impacting the rest because it's this one big thing. Also, it takes a lot more money to run because the models are huge. The other advantage is that, let's say you take a big model and you put all your company data in it. If you tell your employees, okay, I want to build my quarterly report with it, that means they have access to the financial data. But then maybe your engineering team, you don't want them to access the financial data. And then you can't cut it off. It's in the model now, so you can't separate. With agents, you can disable and enable them based on who the user is, so that it's a lot more flexible. And the other thing that you mentioned is that imagine now this world where you have this foundation in your company and you keep adding use case and you keep adding agent and the agent can talk to each other and you can build bigger use case. And now you end up in this vision of the future where every employee have a set of assistants designed for their role. And when the employee leave and a new one come back, the tools and the agents are still there and they remember the last project and they remember what you've been working on. So the onboarding process is not faster. And not only this, but also as the same way you take your laptops and your tables and chairs and your office as asset, the models and the use case that you've built are also part of your asset sheet now because you own them and they're yours and it's built for your company. And so now your company is like AI enabled. And during evaluation of the value of the company, you're going to take in consideration those assets because that means imagine you have an M&A, and the employees are not as critical of the merger, right? Because now you have also agents that can work independently, or you can replace employees by another without having as much struggle. So it makes the company a lot more resilient to changes. So it's like all those things that comes together into this. Well, at the start, it was just like a solution to a problem that everybody is facing, but we can go so much more beyond that.
Mhm. This is quite interesting, but at the same time, in a way slightly alarming, if I may say, because you are envisioning a future where there are so many agents. I could basically have my personal AI assistant, right?
Yeah.
Specialize in one kind of area of expertise. What does this
Well, you can have more
mean?
than one. You can have like
More
an
than
army.
So, speaking of these AI advancements, and when you look at employment, right, what kind of impact this is going to have? And you mentioned in our previous talk that entrepreneurship will be among very few jobs left, right? Because AI, thanks to AI, we will be able to automate a lot of the manual work.
Yeah.
Imagine an aspiring entrepreneur who has a full-time job at the moment. They have a business idea, but for whatever reason, they are hesitating to jump on the opportunity, take the risk, and build their business. What would your message be to this aspiring entrepreneur?
Well, first I want to moderate, what I've said. Of course, I think about this for the very long term, but I think like every industrial revolution, when we had the steam engine, when we had computers, when we have internet, jobs are lost and jobs are created. It's all about, transition. And every time there's a transition, this transition hurts and benefits to some people. It's inevitable. It always happens. The things that people need to be aware of is like the world is changing no matter if you're okay or not with it, right? So it's better to be ready for the changes and try to find a way to take advantage of the change than to complain about it, because that won't change anything, right? Like the bulldozers of Google and Amazon and Microsoft, they won't wait for you because you're not ready, right? So having said that, I think like a future where every employee is augmented with the AI assistant is closer than we think. And that means productivity might increase by 40%. And that also means like, I don't think people are going to be fired, but I think like, for instance, in Luxembourg, when we struggle to find talents, maybe that will be a less of a burden and companies will be able to strive with less people involved, right? And so that would be good for a small ecosystem like Luxembourg, because now we all compete to hire specific people with key skills. And I'm sure that will continue, but maybe AI will help, smooth this a bit out.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, what's amazing is that imagine in a few years, you'll be able to just type your ID and then an entire army of agents will be deployed for you to start the company. At least everybody will be able to start with an army of co-founder, right? And maybe, they're going to be some limits. And so at some point, you're going to replace the agent by experts, like human experts. At the start, maybe you can start with like a AI accountant and an AI lawyers, but you use this as a jump board to build the company, start bigger, and then you start hiring people when you can afford it. But that means the chance of everybody be able to become an entrepreneur and create a company will become easier and easier. Same way with the generative AI we've seen when they generate images and now they make movies and create music. And artists are scared, being like, well, now my job is over. But I don't think that's the way to think about it. I think it's more like people that wanted to be creative but didn't have the talents now can. And I think it's the same way for entrepreneurship, where before you need your entire network of people and there are a few people that have this luck of knowing having a best friend that's a lawyer, having a friend that's an accountant, having a friend that's like an entrepreneur, so you can learn from them. But there are people that have just ideas to change the world, but they haven't built this personal branding and networking, because it's not part of who they are. And so they want to create a company, but they feel maybe alone or without anybody to help them. And in Luxembourg, we have the Chamber of Commerce to help you. So that's already great. But imagine a future where you're like, well, I want to create my business and I'm going to get 10 collaborators from day zero. And that would be great, right? And then, of course, you're going to start hiring real humans to build this workforce, but you can have this hybrid workforce of AI and human working together to build this company. And so, yes, I think in like 10 years, when the AI become even more performant and jobs are at risk, everybody's going to be an entrepreneur. You can be an entrepreneur. Everybody can have an army of 100 employees, artificial employees.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I think, with many things, there are kind of challenges that are looming, right? But as well as a lot of opportunities. And for us, either as professionals and entrepreneurs, it would be in our best interest to think strategically, how can we still remain relevant, right? Because there are a lot of things that humans bring. I hope, at least not in your future, that artificial intelligence can kind of replace, right, this emotional human to human interaction, the social skills, and so on. So I agree, if we can use AI to really kind of up level our game, and
Yeah.
really kind of, if there are a lot of manual things that we don't have to be wasting our time, why?
Yeah, and back before computers, there were people that were the computers. Like, it was the name of a job title before, and they were just doing the math. But now that's being automated, and at the time they were like, well, all those people does the job, and now, the world adapted and it worked out. Same thing for, when the Excel arrived, like, people were like, well, accounting is dead, right? And no, the jobs changed, but it's not dead. Same thing for lawyers, like, sure, maybe the contract will be written by an AI, but I don't want to use this as legal way of communicating with a business partner. I want a lawyer to review it and stamp on it.
Yeah.
And I'm not paying this lawyer to spend 6 hours writing a contract. I'm paying this lawyer to validate that this contract is valid. And it's the same thing for translation, right? I can use Google Translate for small things, but if I had to translate, I don't know, my degree or something, I need an official translation. And sure, Google Translate can do it, but I want the stamp. I want the approval. And so
Indeed.
I think the mindset needs to switch as well into paying for value rather than paying for time, because the paying for time is an old concept from the Industrial Revolution, where working more hours made more productivity. And so you have the clocks everywhere and you have to be like on the chain, building more product. But today, in this world of service and AI, what's important is the value delivered rather than the time spent.
Indeed, yeah. I have so many questions, but we are reaching the end. But there is one question that I have to ask you. It was left by previous guests. They left this question without knowing who they're leaving it for. So the question reads, everybody says you have to be patient, that it takes at least 3 years before you see any positive results in your business. How to stay motivated over such a long period?
I think focusing on small gain, like fractioning the goals. If your goal is to make $1 million, just focus by making $10 every day, And it's the same for if you want to write a book, don't focus on writing the book, focus on writing 1 paragraph a day. If you want to read a book, same thing, just read 1 paragraph a day. If you want to do sport, don't focus on having crazy muscles, just focus on being like, yeah, I'm going every day. We'll see what happens. So I think small incremental habits has a lot more power than thinking too big too fast. And of course, you can have medium, short, long-term goals, but having positive incremental habits every day, I think, is the key to being progressing into the larger direction.
Yeah. For quite a while, I had this a quote written. I would always kind of remind myself of it, one step at a time. Because
Exactly.
like when you stay, I always associate it with climbing a mountain. When you are at the bottom and you look up, there's so long way ahead to go, and it feels really overwhelming. But when you just focus on the first step and then the next step, within short period of time, you will reach the top.
Yeah.
So I couldn't agree more with this suggestion. Thank you so much, Leo. This was very insightful, wide-ranging, and inspiring conversation. I really appreciate the time you took to share your story, but as well as your vision for startup ecosystem here in Europe. I think we have a lot of room for improvement. We have a lot of good things that we are nailing so far. And I think if we do small tweaks here and there, I think we could be much more successful as ecosystem, and we could hopefully help a lot more entrepreneurs to thrive.
Yeah. Thank you for having me over. And if anybody wants to add me on LinkedIn, feel free to do so.
Great. And they can find you with your full name, right?
Exactly.
Perfect. Thank you so much again, Leo. It was a pleasure talking to you.